join your fine organization in this group today. We're going to be talking about building an excellent, ethical, and enduring organization. And let me start by calling your attention to an error in this first slide. I just hate it when I proofread all these slides and find out that I missed something. It's obviously 2015, not 2013. But perhaps that's the first lesson. I used to think as a leader when I was a young man that I had to be perfect with all the answers, and after many decades of scars and experiences, I've learned that leaders have to admit when they make a mistake. So hopefully that will be the only one today, but probably not. So let's dive into what I mean by Triple Crown leadership and our theme of building an excellent, ethical, enduring organization. I'm going to be talking to you about something today that's audacious. Those of you who are in the organizational world, whether it's a for-profit corporation or a non-profit corporation, may think that to build an organization that's excellent and ethical and enduring is really an impossibility. And I'm going to challenge that assumption and say that it really is possible. It's a never-ending quest. The overall theme is that you as a leader need to commit to this audacious quest to build an excellent, ethical, and enduring organization. Anything less than that really is not enough for your leadership. As Mr. Jaffrey kindly said, I have been a serial CEO. I've been fortunate to lead 5 different companies, from a startup to a $1 billion New York Stock Exchange company going through extreme challenges, a very tough turnaround. I've been a leadership student my whole life. I've been honored to be named for several years as one of the top 100 thought leaders in trust. Our book, Triple Crown Leadership, was an award-winning book. It was co-authored with my wonderful son, Greg, who teaches leadership and entrepreneurship at the Royal Institute in Sweden. He's an entrepreneur and the co-author of 3 books, far exceeding his father, and it was a wonderful pleasure to work with my son. In writing this book, we decided it was important to go beyond our own personal leadership experiences, so we spent several years interviewing the leaders, CEOs, board chairs, senior officers of 61 different organizations in 11 different countries. You see some of their logos here. These are for-profit corporations, non-profit, government organizations, military organizations, educational institutions, large and small. And we chose these organizations because we felt they were doing something unique, something different in leadership from the norm that most organizations are doing. And we spent time interviewing them, talking about what are you doing to be so unique. And from that, we tease out 5 practices, which I'm going to share with you today. But let me start by saying I want to focus on these 3 E's that I talked about: excellent, ethical, and enduring. What do we mean by excellent? Well, those of you who are leaders, and really everyone is a leader in some capacity, know that you've got to achieve exceptional results. You've got to make your numbers. This is a tough, competitive world, as we all know. And I've learned the hard way over the years that if I don't achieve my numbers, if I don't achieve exceptional results, I'm going to be replaced as a leader. So in choosing the organizations for our research, we spoke to, for example, the Mayo Clinic, started in the 1860s in the United States by the Mayo family, practicing something unheard of at the time, which was collaborative medicine. Back in the 1860s, the doctor in the United States was king. There were very few female doctors, and the doctor's word was law. And the Mayo family said, that really doesn't make much sense. We really need to be much more collaborative. And so they started a new kind of organization, which is now a global leader, often ranked the top healthcare organization in the world, $8 billion in revenue, and the Mayo Clinic certainly achieves excellent results. We spoke to Google as well, started in 1996 in a Stanford University dorm room. They were not the first search engine, but they had a unique culture and a unique approach to what they wanted to achieve. They're not a perfect organization. None of the organizations that we spoke to is perfect because they're run by human beings. But when they make a mistake, they admit it, like I did on my first slide, and proceed on from there. Google today is over $40 billion in revenue and a juggernaut in the industry. So what we're talking about here with the first E is being excellent, like the Mayo Clinic or like Google, and achieving your numbers. The second element of the triple E quest is to be ethical, to do the right thing. And you may say, well, that's fine, Bob, but I live in a country or I work in an industry where it's very difficult to do that. We have all kinds of terrible things going on, and we've got to be competitive. And I'd like to challenge that assumption. Here's a slide showing the returns, the profit returns from the world's most ethical companies versus the Standard & Poor's 500. What you see here on the green line is the Standard & Poor's 500 list of companies and their percent profit returns over a 5-year period going through 2011. And then you see a plot in orange of the world's most ethical companies as ranked by Ethisphere magazine, who has this comprehensive survey about, are you an ethical company? How many lawsuits do you have? What's your turnover? Things like that. Surprisingly enough, or perhaps not so surprising, the world's most ethical companies outperform the Standard & Poor's 500 list of companies financially. You do better financially if you operate ethically. Now you may want to think about that for a minute. Why might that be? Is it that customers trust us? Is it that employees trust us and stay longer, open up their ideas, and really commit to what we're trying to do? Why would an ethical company be more profitable financially? I think there are a lot of intuitive reasons about why the stakeholders might trust them more. So, for example, here's another slide. Fortune looks at the most admired companies. This is data through 2013. So the world's most admired companies on total shareholder returns versus the S&P 500, you can see for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years, the world's most admired companies outperform financially in shareholder returns the S&P 500, sometimes by substantial amounts. Now, you're not going to be an admired company unless you are trusted, unless people think that you are ethical. So those who say we don't have time to be ethical, we have to cave into what our industry or what our country says that we have to do, may not be on the right track. Here's another slide that shows the same kind of data. I work with an organization called Trust Across America, Trust Around the World, and they look at the world's most trusted companies. Again, they have metrics to determine, are you trusted by your employees, by your customers, by your vendors. And they look at the financial returns of the top 10 most trustworthy companies versus the S&P 500. Again, 1 year data, 38.8% versus 17.59%. 2 year data, 5 year data. Again, the world's most trusted companies outperform financially the S&P 500. Very interesting data. So let's go on to the third E that we talk about in Triple Crown leadership, enduring. And enduring, of course, has the sense of sustainability. Here's some data from a 2013 Harvard Business School paper, which concludes high sustainability companies significantly outperform their counterparts over the long term. both in terms of stock market as well as accounting performance. So companies that are wisely looking at their impact on the environment, trying to be more green, trying to reduce their carbon footprint, which may be contributing to global warming. If they do it smartly, and of course you can do green investments poorly and end up wasting your money, but the companies that do it smartly, that think about what needs to be done, end up having better financial performance in the stock market as well as what they report on their accounting statements. But the word enduring has a second element that Greg and I came out to realize, and that is, are we being sustainable internally? Are we burning out our employees? Are we asking them to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week, sacrifice balance in their life, sacrifice their family life? Decades ago, when I started out in the business world, I expected my colleagues, the folks who work for me, to do that. You had to put the company first. Well, today's generation isn't necessarily going to do that. You may have to do it for a while, but you can't do it on a sustainable basis. So you've got to think about your employees and not burning them out. And there's another element to internal sustainability, or being enduring internally. Too often, I have to confess, in my role as a CEO, I engaged in unsustainable financial practices. I borrowed sales from quarter 2 to make quarter 1. We were lagging in quarter 1, so I went to the head of sales and said, can you pull some orders forward into this quarter? And of course the sales leader said, sure, Bob, I can do that. And then at the end of quarter 2, what did I have to do? I had to pull sales from quarter 3 into quarter 2. I set myself up on an unsustainable treadmill. Or I went to our chief financial officer and I said, does our bad debt reserve really need to be that high? Or can we just shave it down to make this quarter's numbers? I need another penny or two to meet Wall Street expectations. And so we bled down the bad debt reserve or some other reserves until it came to the point where there were no more reserves to bleed down. But I was under such intense short-term pressure, the scourge of short-termism, that I did unsustainable things financially. So the third element of the Triple E quest of Triple Crown leadership, enduring, means you have to be sustainable externally and sustainable internally, not burning out people, not engaging in unsustainable financial practices. So let's skip now to what are the 5 leadership practices that Greg and I teased out in our years of research and the book that we wrote, Triple Crown Leadership. We used the metaphor of the Triple Crown of thoroughbred horse racing, which is the most elusive championship in all of sports, where a 3-year-old thoroughbred horse wins in 1 year the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont Stakes. It's only been done 12 times since 1875. And the 5 practices that I'll briefly skip through, we title Head and Heart, the Colors, Steel and Velvet, Stewards, and Alignment. So let's dive into Head and Heart. What Greg and I discovered from our research, talking to the Mayo Clinic, Google, and those other organizations that I talked about, are that most organizations hire and promote for insufficient reasons. They look primarily at the things on the left side of your screen: head, education, knowledge, skills, experience, intelligence, technical competence. And of course, those things are important. You need smart people, you need experienced people, you need technical competence. But what we heard over and over again in 11 countries around the world is that that's just the minimum bar to recruit or who we need to promote. We really have to look at the right side of the screen, the heart characteristics of an organization, of the people in the organization. What is their level of integrity, their character? What is their emotional intelligence? Are they self-aware? Do they realize they come across as arrogant or egotistical? Are they able to relate to people? Do they have a cultural fit with our organization? Every organization has a culture, how we do things here. How does this candidate or this employee fit with our culture? Are they passionate? Are they authentic to their true north, as author Bill George would say? Do they have courage? So we heard over and over again, head and heart are important, but heart really trumps head. Lynn Easterling, the VP and Deputy General Counsel at Cisco, said, "I can teach the hard skills, but I can't teach good character and good relational skills." So that was a typical quote from what we heard in our research. So the first practice that you need to think about for your organization is, am I hiring and promoting for head and heart? What can I do to build heart into the job descriptions? What can I do to build heart into our interview questions? What can I do before I promote someone to make sure that they have character and good EQ and cultural fit and passion and courage? So the first leadership practice to think about if you want to build a triple E organization is to recruit and promote and develop people for head and heart. The second practice that we outline is what we summarize as colors. In a race, the colors are worn by the jockey or the horse to identify your particular bet. If you're a gambling person in a horse race. And we define colors as three things. What's the purpose of our organization? What are our shared values? And what is our vision? And I'm going to take you through the first two of those, purpose and values. An organization, to be really great, to be a Triple Crown leadership organization, needs to define a lofty purpose. Why are we here? Why do we exist? And it's not your typical mission statement. Your mission statement here over on the right screen talks about what we do or how we do it. It's your business or your products or your customers. We're an IT company in this particular industry. It's probably long, a paragraph. It's probably shorter term. And I will wager, my friends, that not one of you can from memory recite what the mission statement of your organization is. It's probably on your website somewhere or buried in your organizing documents, but it's not alive in the minds and hearts and on the tongues of people in your organization. Great organizations define a lofty purpose statement over on the left side, why we exist. It is very long term. We would recommend that it's very short, a 6-word maximum, and that it's very sticky. Everybody remembers it. Everybody knows it. And so it really is why people come to work. They don't get out of bed to come to work to maximize shareholder value for the short-term day traders. They do it for some other reasons. So, for example, Merck, a leading pharmaceutical company, has as their purpose statement to preserve and improve human life. 5 words. The Walt Disney Company, to make people happy. Try to get your purpose statement down to 3, 4, 5, 6 words that really resonate with people. You can keep your mission statement if you want to that talks about your business and your industry and your markets, but what's really going to resonate with people if you want to build a Triple Crown organization is a short, memorable, sticky purpose statement. Then we come to shared values. Now, many organizations have value statements on their website or on the wall in the lobby, but everybody knows that's not the way we operate here. The great organizations that we spoke to around the world set shared values that guide the behavior of people. Values guide the behavior of people, and the behaviors of people determine the culture of the organization. The culture is how we do things here, what's allowed, what's not allowed. the way people operate, especially when the boss isn't present. We spoke to Tom McCoy, who is now the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of a great organization, CH2M Hill, and we're going to hear more about them later. And Tom said it nicely when he said, values tell you what to do when you don't know what to do. And having been the CEO of some very tough businesses, tough turnarounds, I can tell you there were times we didn't know what to do. Every alternative we looked at had terrible repercussions. And so we had to turn to our shared values to say, what should we do in this terrible situation? Shared values are core beliefs for how we want to behave. They should be memorable by everyone. 4 to 7 words. Use an acronym for them if possible. An acronym takes the first letter of each word and forms another word or some memorable phrase. At one company where I was CEO, our shared values were leadership, integrity, teamwork, and excellence. LITE was the acronym, LIGHT. And at midnight, if we were facing some terrible alternative, we just would think about our acronym for our values for how we wanted to behave, LITE, and would help guide us to a better decision. You can have some explanatory phrases for each of those words. What do we mean by leadership? We ended up developing at one company what we called a STAR leadership model to explain what we meant by leadership. Leadership wasn't, well, I'm the boss now, go get me a cup of coffee and get me the corner office here. It meant other things. It meant being open, being transparent, caring about people. So we had explanatory phrases for each of our 4 words in our acronym. The shared values should be applicable to all stakeholders, and they should be used for daily decision making. And it's not just written by you, the leader, but it's drafted perhaps by you and then sent out to the organization where people respond. Sam Palmisano, when he ran IBM, had a 3-day leadership jam at IBM where they rethought IBM's shared values and got input from tens of thousands of people around the world and then synthesized that into a new set of shared values for IBM. We spoke to a wonderful company in India, Infosys, in IT services. Started in 1981 by a group of people around a kitchen table who set out to become India's most respected company. They started out with $250. Their credo, powered by intellect, driven by values. You can call that perhaps their overall purpose statement, powered by intellect, driven by values. And their values are the acronym C Life. C means client, leadership, integrity, fairness, and excellence. Their market cap in 2014 was over $30 billion. This is in a country rife, as you know, with lots of corruption. And they set out to be India's most respected company, never paying a bribe. Not perfect, they've had some glitches here and there, but they have by and large succeeded in creating a great organization in India, even in a very corrupt culture for their country. So that's the second of the 5 practices, the colors, purpose and values. I don't have time to go into vision, but I can certainly talk to you about that in a future webinar if you like. So let's skip over to the third practice, which is steel and velvet. Steel is the steel bit in the horse's mouth. Velvet is the soft touch or the soft blanket that you cover the horse with. And you really have to flex between steel and velvet. Each of us have a leadership style. Some of you have probably been through the Myers-Briggs or the Insights wheel. This is my personal leadership style profile done in 2013. The red is director, the yellow is inspirer, the green is supporter, the blue is observer, and each of us are somewhere here. Here's my spot. I'm primarily red. I talk too much, I interrupt people. I finish people's sentences. I'm too impatient. Yet I have some yellow. I'm inspiring, but I'm not really an observer or a coordinator. And so a lot of us say, well, that's my personality style. And you say, stay stuck there. And that really is insufficient. We heard over and over again in our research that regardless of where you are on the insights wheel or the Myers-Briggs profile, you have to flex, sometimes being steel and sometimes being velvet. Steel is, there are times you have to exert your position, your title, your power, your authority. And people who are afraid to do that aren't going to really be effective leaders. They're going to be run over. There are times you have to be steel, exercising your power and your authority. But if you're steel all the time, what will people do? They'll shut down, waiting for you to come up with the answers. So being steel is not enough. Now, steel does not mean bullying, does not mean yelling and screaming at people. It means at times respectfully exercising your authority, your power. But there are times you have to flex to velvet. Velvet means being quiet, listening, asking questions, letting other people lead because they have the passion or they have the experience. If you're trying to lead everything all the time, you're going to fail as a leader because people are going to shut down. If you're quiet all the time, letting other people lead, that's not going to work either. So Lori Norrington at eBay said, sometimes you have to be a wartime general, sometimes a peacetime general. Wartime is steel. Peacetime is velvet. If it's a crisis, you may have to be more steel. There are times in my turnarounds I had to be a wartime general, but most of the time I needed to be a peacetime general. Steel and velvet also means that you have to protect and coach the mavericks. Mavericks are the people who are different. They dress differently. They're quirky. They're odd. But I discovered that the mavericks are essential to the organization. Mavericks have the out-of-the-box ideas. But a key criterion for our definition of a maverick is they buy into the colors. They are committed to our purpose, to our shared values, to our vision. They may look different. They may dress different. But they are committed to our purpose. Those are people that you have to use your steel to protect, because organizations tend to resist mavericks, to push them out. And you have to use your velvet to coach them. Maybe you have to come to the meeting on time. Maybe you can't wear flip-flops into the meeting with the key customer. So you need to use your steel and velvet to protect and coach the mavericks who buy into the colors of your organization. And then you have to use the steel to fire the toxic. The toxic people are the malicious compliers. You ask them to do something, they know there are some unintended consequences, but you're not aware of those, and they say, sure boss, sure Bob, I'll do that, and they maliciously comply. Or they suck the energy out of a room. They are the emotional vampires. They're criticizing. They're launching missiles at people across the table. They're really sucking out the energy from the room. Or they're the destructive achievers. They're the high-performing salesperson who lies to the customer. Or the engineer who thinks he's the smartest, greatest engineer in the world, and he leaves a trail of broken bodies and egos behind him because he's disrespectful and he's untrustworthy. These are the people that you have to take out of the organization because they're cancers in the organization. We spoke to Ursula Burns, the CEO of Xerox, and she said it simply. She said, Bob, we fire them. We spoke to Jack Kroll, the outside lead director, and Ed Breen, the new CEO of Tyco, after the old CEO went to jail. This is Dennis Kozlowski, who went to jail with his CFO, Mark Schwartz, for some outrageous behavior. And when Jack Kroll, as outside lead director, and Ed Breen, as new CEO, came in to take over Tyco, they fired not only the top 290 people in the company, but the entire board. And they reconstituted the board of directors because they needed a fresh start. And many of those people were destructive achievers, toxic people. So the third practice of Triple Crown leadership is to flex between steel and velvet. The fourth practice is to unleash stewards in the organization. Stewards have the words at the bottom of this slide: an irrevocable license to lead from the shared values. An irrevocable license to lead from the shared values. Leaders in the organizations that we researched empower other leaders. And they empower them by giving them this irrevocable license to lead from the shared values. They're not empowered just by the policies of the organization. They're not empowered just by the boss saying, I empower you, with the implicit right to withdraw that empowerment at any time. They give people in the organization an irrevocable license to lead by the shared values. Think about the acronym I mentioned before for one of my companies, LITE, L-I-T-E, Leadership, Integrity, Teamwork, Excellence. You're empowered to be a leader. You're empowered to operate with integrity. You're empowered to operate as a good team member and to seek excellence. We give people an irrevocable license to lead by the shared values, empowering them. Because what we discovered is that Triple Crown Leadership, TCL, is a group performance. We think all too often about leadership being with one person, the leader at the top, with everyone else below saying, yes, ma'am, or yes, sir, and being a willing follower. What we're saying is that you need to think about leadership more dynamically, more organically. It ebbs and flows between people. It's kind of like jazz. In a jazz musical group, sometimes it's the bass that's leading. Sometimes it's the saxophone. Sometimes it's the trumpet or the drums. The leadership ebbs and flows depending on the experience and passion of the person there. And you as a leader sometimes have to exercise your steel authority and say, no, I'm going to insist we always achieve our results ethically. We never borrow sales from quarter two to make quarter one. We never bleed down the reserves. We never burn out our people. But there are other times you have to be quiet and listen and be velvet and let other people lead. That really unleashes a group performance which is very, very powerful. We spoke to the CEO of Newsoft, one of China's largest IT solutions and services provider. There are their values up in the upper left corner. But Lou Jiren, the CEO, told us leadership at Newsoft is not a single person, not the CEO, COO, or the CFO. We need all the leaders from the bottom up. So how do you empower people? How do you give them the irrevocable license to lead by the shared values? Well, my experience over the years running many different companies is there are some empowering words. You can say to somebody, I trust you. You can say to someone, I believe in you. You can say to someone, I've got your back. I trust you to lead this project. I believe in you. I'll be here to answer your questions. I'll be here to coach you along, but I want you to lead it. And if something goes wrong, I've got your back. Operate by our shared values. I trust you to do that because you fit our colors. You buy into our purpose. You buy into our values and our vision. You've got heart, not just head characteristics. But I trust you. I believe in you. I've got your back. That's the way to unleash what we call culture stewards. Culture is, as I've said before, how we do things here. And you can either have a culture of fear on the left side of the scale there, or a culture of trust where people are working together. And when someone makes a mistake, someone else steps up and fills in for them and say, I'll take care of that. You never hear, that's not my job. Everybody says, I'm a part of this team. And the culture of how we do things here is to operate on trust and to help one another. So what we conclude in Triple Crown Leadership is that everybody should have 2 jobs. Now I know that sounds crazy, right? But I'm going to tell you everybody should have 2 jobs. Job 1 is their job in IT, or their job in marketing, or their job in human resources. But job 2 is to be a steward for the culture of the organization. That means they have an irrevocable license to lead by the shared values. And when they see someone doing something, even the CEO, they are empowered to say, wait a minute, I'm not sure about that. How does that fit with our shared values? Does that really fit with how we want to operate here? So it gives them a very powerful license to lead, to be a steward. Now the 5th practice, and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to mention this, is alignment. How do you align an organization? Well, there have been many books written on alignment. I've read them all. Most of them are terrible. And we have developed our own alignment model, which we describe in a chapter of the book. It starts with the long term, the colors, purpose, values, and vision. Those are the aspirational things. And then it cascades down to the medium term. What are our goals? What's our strategy? What people do we need? How do we organize them into a structure? And then short-term things. What processes do we need? What action plans? Who will do what by when? And what are the communication loops, the metrics and the meetings and the personnel actions that we take to reinforce this? Those are the execution things. This is a very deliberate model. It flows from long-term to medium-term to short-term. It goes from why are we here down to who will do what by when and how often do we change. And I have used this model numerous times, and it's been very successful in creating an aligned organization. And let me tell you, my friends, an aligned organization like this is very powerful. You don't want to go into competition against this kind of organization. This organization is disciplined. This is powerful. This is aligned. And this is the kind of organization that's reflected in the 5 practices of Triple Crown Leadership. So in summary, right before we get to your questions here, I'll say that the overarching message of this webinar is to commit to build an excellent, ethical, and enduring organization. Achieve exceptional results. Do it the right way, with integrity, and do it in an enduring, sustainable way, both externally for our environment and internally with your people and with reasonable financial practices. And the 5 practices to do that are to hire and promote for head and heart. Head is the minimum entry bar. Heart is critical. Define a lofty purpose, shared values, and vision. Purpose is just a few words. Shared values guide behavior. And flex your leadership style between steel and velvet. Protect and coach those mavericks who are quirky but buy into the colors of the organization. Get rid of the toxic performers. Unleash culture stewards who have 2 jobs with an irrevocable license to lead by the values, and then go through the 10-step alignment process to collaboratively align your organization. So, Mr. Jaffrey, we've come to almost the 49th minute. Let me pause here. I do have some closing slides and a story to tell, but let's pause here for some questions from the audience.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Robert Menard, for a very interesting presentation. Folks, we are open for the question and answers. You could either put your questions in the question chat box, or you could raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on your webinar console. So if you click on it, you'll be able to speak directly with the speaker. So let me go straight to the question box. We have the first question from Steward Abela. The question is, what you are saying though is not that the company has to be ethical, but it only has to appear ethical. Outwardly, a company may appear ethical and trustworthy, but they could treat their staff very unethically. Any comments?
I don't know what I said, Stewart, to say that a company just has to appear ethical. If I said anything like that, then I was wrong and I made another mistake, so hold me accountable to that. What I'm saying is that the company must be ethical. It must commit to operate ethically. It must be trustworthy. It must be admired. It must operate with integrity. And that needs to start at the board level. The board needs to recruit a CEO to operate that way. The CEO needs to then have a leadership team that operates that way. So if I said just appear ethically, let me correct that. It must commit to operate ethically if you want to be a Triple Crown organization.
Thank you very much. We have another interesting comment from Mr. Abdul Salam. The question is, rather a comment, I think culture fits more with plants, not humans. That's why I suggest to call it our values or our morals instead of our culture. Any comments, sir?
Well, of course, we have to understand language differences around the world, and I understand there are certain areas of the world where class distinctions are more set in their ways than they are in other areas. Use the words liberally. If you want to use the word values or morals rather than the word culture, that's fine with me. A lot of organizations talk about their culture, and sometimes there are very complicated definitions of culture. We prefer simple definitions, so Greg and I define culture as how we do things here, how we behave. If you don't want to use the word culture, if you say we want to behave according to our values, according to the morals of our society, that's fine. I have no problem with that. Let's not get hung up on the semantics of words.
Well, thank you. We have another one, a short one on head and heart. How can we determine if a candidate or a colleague has good heart qualities?
Well, at the end of our chapter on head and heart, we have a list of questions you can use. Or we have a website, which I'll show you a slide on later. It's triplecrownleadership.com. And if you go to our website and click on the Resources tab, you'll see there a list of questions that you can ask of candidates to determine their heart characteristics. Now, in many countries, we have to be careful about what we ask people. We can't ask them their religion or other sensitive private questions. So you need to, of course, be careful about what you're asking people. So at the end of the Head and Heart chapter in our book, Triple Crown Leadership, or on the resources page of our website, triplecrownleadership.com, you'll find a list of the kinds of questions you can ask. And I would suggest that if you buy into this concept, you just chat with your colleagues and brainstorm the kind of questions that you'd like to ask people when they're being interviewed by your firm, or that you want to ask yourself before you promote someone to a higher level position. And then you may need to check with your human resources department or your legal department, but you can ask questions that will determine the heart level of a person. For example, I'll give you one here. Tell me an example of a mistake that you've made in business, and what were the repercussions and what you learned from that. If the person says, well, I made this mistake, but it wasn't really my fault, it was somebody else's, the blame was not mine, I was fine, what you're hearing is someone who doesn't really accept their own responsibility, as opposed to someone who says, I made this mistake, here's why I did it, but I realized afterwards I was wrong. And from that, this is what I learned. I have to listen more, I have to be more humble, I have to be more open. Now you've got somebody who's expressing more heart characteristics. So asking about a mistake that they've made and what they learned from it gives you an indication of their heart qualities.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another one from Zane Romani. The question is, sometimes the company's targets conflicts with company's values. How do you handle that?
Well, that's true. And so goal setting, which is how you set your targets, is really important. Now, let me admit that what I'm talking about here, first of all, is not the norm for how most companies operate. It's not the way most companies operate in the Middle East or the Far East or in Europe or the United States. What I'm talking about here in these 5 practices are the leading cutting-edge practices of the best companies that we could find around the world in our research. So I don't want you to think that this is the way we operate in America or in Europe. What I'm talking about is the best of the best. And too many boards set unrealistic goals for CEOs. You have to increase the earnings per share by 20% a year, every year. Well, after a while, that becomes impossible. And if the board does that and the CEO accepts that and the CEO then cascades that down to his leadership team and they cascade that down, you're going to have conflict between the targets or the goals and the values. So ideally, if you look at the Mayo Clinic board or the Google board or the eBay board, you'll find that they're not setting unrealistic targets. Or the board may set only financial targets. We don't care about customers. We don't care about employees. We don't care about the environment or the community. All we care about is to make earnings per share, revenue growth. Those are signs of somebody who does not understand what is emerging in the leadership world today. So ideally, the board will set reasonable, they may have some stretch in it, but reasonable goals. Goals for customers, goals for financial results, goals for employees, goals for the community, for the environment. So one major goal with sub-goals for each major stakeholder. Ideally, that's what would be done. We may not live in that environment, and you may then have a boss who's coming down with only financial goals that are unrealistic. Well, you have to negotiate up front. You have to say, that's not acceptable. We can't make that. We can't grow earnings by 25% next year. The industry's growing at 12%. We can't double that necessarily. And you've got to fight that battle up front to try and get reasonable goals and set goals by other stakeholder groups, customers, employees too. Customers may be market share or revenue growth. Employees may be turnover or employee satisfaction kinds of goals. If you're not able to do that and you're stuck in an environment where only financial goals come down and they are unrealistic, I would suggest, my friend, you have to rethink if you're working at the right place. Because sooner or later, that kind of short-term financial unreasonable pressure will make you compromise your own personal moral compass, and that may not be the organization where you belong longer term.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one last question. What are your views on psychometric assessments tools and their universal applicability without having a built-in established cultural norms? Are they really designed to determine person's personality globally, or they are mostly commercial tools?
Well, I'm no expert on psychometric tools. I think I have seen them used, and I think they can be valuable as one part of your hiring or your promotional equation. But too many of these tools put people in a box. They say, well, this is your psychological predilection. You're this kind of person. Or if you use what I was talking about before, the Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENTJ in the Myers-Briggs, extroverted, intuitive, thinking, judger. And too many people get that psychometric evaluation and say, well, that's my box, that's who I am. And they say stuck there. And so I really say, while it is important to know your psychometric evaluation or your Myers-Briggs or Insights evaluation. Good leaders have to go beyond that. If you're shy and retiring, you have to learn to speak up. If you're too talkative and too dominating as I am, you have to learn to dial it down. So I think it can be a small part of your portfolio, but human judgment, recognizing the practices of great organizations like we've outlined in Triple Crown Leadership, is going to be a better set of tools for you than just saying, well, psychometric tools are what we use and they're the best of the best. So I hope I've addressed that.
Thank you very much, sir. Now that brings us towards the end of the question and answers. I understand that you have a few further slides that you would like to share, sir, before we dismiss out.
I do, and thank you, Mr. Jeffrey, for helping me navigate my way through this webinar. I said I would give you some contact information. Here is our website, triplecrownleadership.com. Greg and I have a lot of blogs, dozens and dozens, more than 100 blogs on all kinds of subjects, and a lot of free resources there. Feel free, anyone here, to email me with a question if I haven't explained something, or if you're wanting more information on something. You could reach me at bob@triplecrownleadership.com. We're on Facebook at Triple Crown Leadership, and we welcome people to sign up. Sign up on our website, and you'll get our blogs and free resources whenever we publish them. So I want to come back to the overarching theme of this webinar, and that is that as a leader, I'm going to make the audacious suggestion that you need to commit to build an excellent, ethical, and enduring organization. There are 5 practices that we've spoken about here: hire and promote for head and heart, define a lofty purpose, shared values and vision, flex your leadership style from steel to velvet depending on the situation and the people, protect and coach the mavericks who buy into the colors of the organization but are different, get rid of the toxic performers, unleash culture stewards who have their regular job and an irrevocable license to lead by the values, and then go through some kind of collaborative alignment process. Let me close by telling you briefly one story that really impacted Greg and I. This is a photograph of the Rocky Flats site in 1989, 12 miles outside of downtown Denver. It was a complex consisting of 800 buildings with 8,000 unionized workers, surrounded by razor wire and guarded by armed guards who had shoot-to-kill authority because they were making the plutonium triggers for the U.S. nuclear arsenal. And it was a top-secret complex close to a population center in Denver of about 1 million people, and very few people were aware of what was going on the Rocky Flats site. It was started in the early 1950s and continued to operate that way until there was a raid on Rocky Flats in 1989. The FBI and the Environmental Protection Agency heard rumors that some bad things were going on at the Rocky Flats site. So they came in one night in SUVs and broke through the fence and said, we've heard some bad things are going on here. And to their horror, they discovered that the contract managers who were working for the Department of Energy had been dumping toxic plutonium waste on the site. To their horror, they discovered 100 tons of toxic plutonium had been dumped onto the site 12 miles from 1 million people in downtown Denver. So they shut down Rocky Flats, but they didn't know if they'd have to open it up again because they didn't know if the Cold War at the time was going to be over or not. So for 6 years, they paid the 8,000 unionized workforce. For 6 years until 1995, they had the workforce come to work, and they paid them at a cost of $500 million a year. And the workforce was outraged because it wasn't their fault. It was the managers that had been doing this. And they became very upset with what was going on. Can you imagine coming to work with the newspaper headlines going on about all the terrible things at Rocky Flats, and then you're reading a book or playing chess and checkers and not doing any work? Well, finally in 1995, the Department of Energy decided that they would clean up Rocky Flats, and they gave a new contract to CH2M Hill, a large global engineering firm. And we spoke to Nancy Tour, who was the CEO of Rocky Flats. And she told us the workforce had forgotten how to succeed. Nobody would look you in the eye. Nobody would smile at you. And the government said it was going to take, listen to these numbers, 65 years and cost $37 billion to clean up Rocky Flats, because nobody had ever cleaned up 100 tons of toxic plutonium waste. They had no idea how to do it. It was a black hole. And the folks at CH2M Hill said, how can this possibly take so long? Our children will retire before it's done. So they said, we're not going to accept that. Even though it's a cost-plus contract, even though we could milk it for many years, it's just not right to have this waste so close to downtown Denver. And so they made a new ethical commitment. 9 words: make it safe, clean it up, close it down. And they said, we have to do something much faster than 65 years and much cheaper than $37 billion. And so they began to do unprecedented things. They bulldozed the administration building where the previous managers came in their suits and ties and sat in their executive dining room with their reserved parking and their china plates and silverware. They bulldozed that. Nancy Tour went to work in a trailer in jeans and boots. She ate her lunch off the lunch truck alongside the workforce. She said, we've just got to reestablish trust. The senior executives donned bubble suits and went into the infinity rooms. There were rooms there that were locked and closed because the Geiger counters went to infinity. They were so radioactively hot. And rather than just send the workers in there, the senior executives donned the bubble suits and went into the infinity rooms to say what's there and how can we clean it up. And slowly they unleashed leaders. They offered to share the profits, to give 20% of the profits to the workforce. They said, we're going to operate safely. We're going to do this ethically. We're going to clean it up properly. We're not going to cut any corners. And they slowly reestablished trust with the workforce. And many workers came forth with great ideas about what to do. And the end of the story is that Rocky Flats today is a wildlife refuge. Deer and elk and eagles fly there. It was closed not after 65 years, but after 10 years. Not for a cost of $37 billion, but for a cost of $6 billion. Rocky Flats today is a great example of an organization operating to be excellent, achieve excellent results, do it ethically, and do it enduring for their people and enduring for their organization. I have no doubt that all of you on this call, on this webinar, can do it as well. I wish you good luck in building your Triple Crown organization. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Robert Manurek, for a very, very intriguing and indeed a very inspirational presentation. I really want to thank you on the behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship for your time and valuable information that you have shared. So once again, sir, thank you very much. And thank you all of those who participated in this webinar, and thank you for the questions. We are recording this webinar, which will be uploaded on Mile Community. So please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org for updates. Thank you very much.